Hello and welcome to Efficiency Vermont's webinar about flood resilience. My name is Matthew Smith. I'm Efficiency Vermont's Public Relations Manager. And the experts with us today who will be answering some of your questions are Li-Ling Young, Lead Engineering Consultant with Efficiency Vermont. Li-Ling, go ahead and introduce yourself to some folks if you would.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. I have been with Efficiency Vermont for some time, and I work in the residential side of things. I'm really sorry that we all are here talking again about flooding, but I'm really looking forward to sharing our expertise with you.
Thanks, Li-Ling. I'm also going to introduce Matt Sharp, another engineering consultant we have here at Efficiency Vermont. Matt, go ahead and introduce yourself if you would.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm happy to be here. Thank you for joining us. I'm coming to you from Addison County, where I grew up and currently live, and grew up loving spending time at the rivers and also often finding ourselves daunted by their power. So feeling for everyone out there who's been affected by this round and others, and looking forward to trying to share some information with you today.
Thanks, Matt. Also on the call today, some colleagues in operations support. We have Becca Pavlik, who, along with my colleague Bridget Ash, is going to be collecting some of the questions that might come in through the Q&A and sharing some links in the chat as we go. Becca, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself to the good folks.
Sure, I'm Becca. I'm a senior energy advisor on our operations support team, so answering customer calls, and I live in Ludlow, Vermont.
Thank you, Becca. And I'm coming to you from Winooski, which is both my home and the Efficiency Vermont offices. So we'll get started here. And again, if you have a question, share it in the chat. We'll read those questions later on in the Q&A. And a reminder, this webinar is being recorded, so you'll get an email when we're finished here with a link to the recording and to the slides when we're finished. There's going to be a lot of information, a lot of links in these slides. Don't feel like you have to write it all down as we go. You'll get the slides afterwards, so I hope you can just kind of pay attention to some of the information Matt and Li-Ling will be sharing and think about how it applies to your project, your situation, I should say. So what we'll cover today, we're going to start with some helpful resources that will deal with some basics about flood cleanup and guidance. A lot of these are coming from the state of Vermont and connecting to some federal resources. We'll also talk about some Efficiency Vermont resources that will be helpful to mention early on. We'll spend the bulk of our time today talking about addressing flood damage, making repairs with resilience in mind. A few things we'll cover there, things like drying out, managing moisture, insulation and air sealing, indoor quality, things like that. This is kind of good information whether you're rebuilding your home from flood damage or, as mentioned, thinking about resilience in the years ahead to a future flood. We'll talk about mechanical systems in your home, heating, hot water, electrical, things like that. And we'll look at some specific Efficiency Vermont offers available now as you're rebuilding. And again, we'll have some time for questions later on. So before we dive in, if there's one thing you take away from the webinar today, I hope it's this. I'd encourage you to sign up for a free virtual home energy visit from Efficiency Vermont. We'll cover a lot of basics in this webinar today, but the virtual home energy visit is a way for you to get personal advice based on what's happening in your home and for your situation. The virtual home energy visit is about a 90-minute walkthrough of your home with an Efficiency Vermont expert through a video chat or a phone call. It's really a great step one to understanding what your options are and making a plan for next steps, no matter what stage in cleanup or rebuilding you currently are in. Speaking of stages, let's start by just recognizing that recovery is a long process. And everyone may be at a different stage of that process. Cleanup can take longer depending on your home, your location, and the kind of damage you're dealing with. It's okay if you're still in those early stages of recovery. Some parts of the Northeast Kingdom just saw flooding last week. So let's just acknowledge the hard work to get where you are right now and the hard work that cleaning up is going to require. If you're in that cleanup stage, we have some links here from the EPA, some excellent resources that can help. The State Agency of Natural Resources has some debris guidelines to know about, especially around hazardous materials. You'll find a link there. There's also some important guidance on mold prevention and cleanup from the State Department of Health. And just a quick word and thank you to groups like Bury Up, Crew in Waterbury, Curve, or Kingdom United Resilience and Recovery Effort. those and many, many other community groups are coordinating resources and volunteers on the ground. If you haven't already, check in with town officials and those groups. They have a lot of great people and resources that are there and ready to help. A few more resources to mention as we get going. If you haven't already, report any damage that you've experienced from the floods to 211. You can call 211 or you can visit vermont211.org. This is damage to homes, businesses, or farms. You can make separate reports if you've been hit by more than one flooding incident. Even if you're not intending to get help for the repairs, even if you don't intend to submit any kind of insurance for the flood damage, it's really important to report that damage because it really helps your neighbors and your community. It's an accurate way for the whole state to assess the damage of these floods, and it will help your town, your community, and the state access some federal support when it comes to applying for a disaster declaration. You may be curious about those FEMA assessments for a FEMA disaster declaration. We do know state officials have said that FEMA is in Vermont and they're assessing damage in several counties. The best way to help right now with that is report any damage to 211 because that helps FEMA in their assessment. There are a few other state resources here on this slide for fuel tank damage, free water test kits. If your personal well was impacted, you can visit a local health office or you can go to the Department of Health's website to order one online. There's some support for folks living in mobile or manufactured homes, and there's some resources in multiple languages for your household or your community where English might not be the first language. And a quick word here on mental health. This is the second year in a row we've seen some of these catastrophic floods, and we all know now that flooding can be extremely stressful, exhausting, and traumatizing. And just important to remember that you're not alone in this process. There's help available for you. If you need help cleaning up, there's a crisis cleanup hotline. You can see that 802 number on the top of your screen there. That's for emergency help if you need cleaning up, mucking out a basement, or other cleanup support. There's also disaster crisis counseling. That's the 1-800 number you see on your screen there. That's free and multilingual help for disaster distress. And you can also call, text, or chat the 988 National Crisis and Suicide Prevention line, or you can chat online on your computer or your smartphone, 988lifeline.org/chat. You can use 988 for yourself or a loved one who maybe needs some crisis support. And 988 is kind of a universal entry. So no matter where you live or what your situation is, you can get connected to a crisis counselor 24/7 through the 988 helpline. So as you're taking care of yourself, your home, your community, remember to also take care of yourself and loved ones. And these resources, especially the 988 Lifeline, can help with that. All right. A quick note from the state here. If you have a business that was damaged in this year's floods, they have a brief survey they're asking all businesses, both for-profit and nonprofit, to complete. That's in addition to reporting any damage to 211, as we've discussed. And this is for businesses or nonprofits that saw physical damage or property this year, 2024. So you can find that online at the ACCD website or in the link here when we're finished. Just quick note in the chat, I see, yes, these slides will be available after the webinar, and these links will take you where you need to go. So again, no need to worry about getting those links down as we go. So I want to have a quick word on orienting you to the Efficiency Vermont rebates that are available and how to think about what's available to you. Last year, you may be aware that Efficiency Vermont launched some flood-specific rebates tied to the 2023 floods. Now, state policymakers put some very strict eligibility limits on those programs for flood damage that occurred in 2023. In fact, in those specific dates you see on your screen in July and for Addison County in August of last year. Unfortunately, that means that those 2023 offers are not available for damage that happened in floods this year. If you're still affected by those 2023 floods, those programs are available. So contact Efficiency Vermont for that help. Now, Efficiency Vermont is engaging with our policymakers about eligibility changes. The best way to get word of anything that might come up is sign up for our newsletter. There's a link right there on our slide. We'll send any updates that way. But today, we're talking about offers that are available right now and that can help you rebuild and recover right now. So we have some programs for folks who have been flooded this year, and also folks who are thinking about increasing the resilience in their home if they're worried about a future flood. So as we go through the webinar today, just remember we're focusing on what's available right now. So a word on income eligibility. You'll hear income eligible or low and moderate income used in the webinar today. And that's because many Efficiency Vermont rebates and programs have additional savings for households that are considered low or moderate income in their county. Whether your low or moderate income is based on the county you live in, number of people in your household, and your income. And there are new income thresholds calculated each year by the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development. Efficiency Vermont just updated those levels for 2024. And what that means is that more households today will qualify under these expanded income levels. So even if you've thought about this in the past or even applied for programs in the past, you might not have qualified as low or moderate income before, but it's important to check and see if you might qualify now. I want to stress there are many offers that are available regardless of income, but you can get some additional support if you are income qualified. I know this slide has a lot of numbers and it can be tricky to read. These are the income eligibility levels for 2024 for Efficiency Vermont's programs. If you want to look at this slide, there's a link at the bottom. But I just want to go through a quick example or two so you can kind of understand how to navigate this slide. So for example, on the left-hand side, you can see the different counties in the state. And on the top, you'll see numbers for number of people in your household. So if we were to look at Chittenden County, for example, that's the top row, and a family of 4 in Chittenden County can earn $142,700 a year and still qualify as moderate income. If you're in Washington County, this is the third row from the top. A family of 4 in Washington County is able to qualify as moderate income for earning up to $126,500. And in most Vermont counties, a family of 4 making $122,000 a year or less is considered moderate income. So it's just important for you to think about where you would fall in this income eligibility to get the most of what's available to you. And a reminder again, a lot of the rebates we'll talk about today don't necessarily take income into account. So there's a lot available regardless of income. All right, this is the last slide for me before we move on to flood damage portion of our webinar. Efficiency Vermont and our partners have some offers specifically for low income households. These offers can be really helpful for homes dealing with flood damage. Offers like free weatherization. This is also applied for manufactured or mobile homes. You can get 100% of the cost covered for a heat pump water heater. There's a voucher for a new appliance. These are helpful for flooded homes, but also available to all low-income households in Vermont. So we've run through some resources for cleaning up and getting your home ready for repairs. We've sketched out some Efficiency Vermont resources to consider as we go along. Let's now talk about addressing flood damage and what you can do to rebuild with resilience. And I'll hand it over to my colleague, Li-Ling Young.
Thanks, Matthew. I'm going to bang through my part pretty quickly. And if you're wishing that I had lingered on some of this more, just want to remind you about those virtual home energy visits. You can get a more personalized approach to questions you have about your home, and you get an engineering consultant like myself or Matt Sharp working with you directly for an hour or an hour and a half. So if this is feeling like you want more, then check out the virtual home energy visit. So before I start talking about flood recovery, I just want to remind us all that buildings are places where forces of physics are in play, just like any other, part of our world. And so things that happen in one part of your home, like the basement, for instance, will affect other parts of your home. And so as you work to dry out after a flood, the condition of the whole house is going to impact how quickly the drying will happen. And it's also something to consider as you plan for future resilience. So the illustration there is showing that in the wintertime, all the leaks that are in the lowest part of your home are going to leak air inward, and all the air leaks at the top are going to leak outward. And so decisions about improving your home always need to take this mechanism into account. Likewise, moisture in materials and in the air, they move in a predictable way. So cold materials dry out slowly, and really anything that's cold is going to be wet most of the year. And heat energy helps things dry out faster. Moisture is always going to move from areas of higher concentration to those with lower concentration. We're going to talk about this more in a moment, but for now, I just want to remind you, you can't fool physics. You can't undo that in your home. You need to work with physics. So whether you're just living in your house or making resilience changes or recovering from a flood, treat your house as a system governed by natural forces, and you're going to be more successful with your efforts. Next slide, Matthew. Thank you. So now we're going to start talking about specific things that you can do in recovering for a flood. And I just want to preface that by saying that you really should always be wearing personal protective equipment when doing any flood recovery work. So indoors, that needs to include a respiratory protection. So go out to a hardware store, get yourself a $40 respirator. And this is not a job for a paper surgical mask. In addition to the respirator, you should be wearing chemical-proof gloves, coveralls, maybe the disposable Tyvek type of coveralls, and muck boots. Floodwaters can be contaminated in all kinds of ways, so protect yourself from water, mud, and debris. So first effort here should be to get all the bulk liquid water out of the house. If you start trying to dry out things with fans and dehumidifiers, but you still have puddles of water, that's going to take forever. So you need to get the liquid water out first. Remove saturated materials like carpets and furniture and your belongings even. It's hard to dry things out fast enough to salvage them, and you really need to be focusing on the house. So fans and open windows will help dry out materials when the outdoor air has low humidity, but it's hard to tell when the outdoor humidity is too high for fans to be effective. My advice is to look at the dew point. The larger the gap is between the outdoor air temperature and the dew point temperature, the better you'll be able to dry out your house with fans and open windows. So I suggest at least 10-degree difference between the outdoor air temperature and the dew point. When it's too humid outside for fans and open windows to help, that's when you use a dehumidifier. And of course, a dehumidifier is also going to be helpful when it gets cold outside. So to use a dehumidifier, close up the space. That includes closing the windows and also isolating it from the rest of the house. Next slide. So drying out as fast as possible is the best you can do so that mold doesn't take hold. And it might mean that you need to tear apart part of the building. But when you put it back together, you're going to have a chance of making improvements. When you're rebuilding, there might be a justification for doing something quick and cheap, particularly if you need time to plan for a longer term resilience project, like maybe putting insulation on the outside of your wall behind the siding. But if you're planning now for a permanent fix, particularly something that you need to be durable against future flooding, some materials are more able to recover from being inundated. So choose carefully. Air sealing as you go is always a good idea. Don't worry about preserving air leaks as a way to help a building dry out or breathe. Little leaks like that don't really help in the way that you need them to. And the benefits of air sealing are worth the effort. They keep the building more comfortable. Sealing up the building keeps it more comfortable. It makes it easier to control air quality and humidity. It saves energy. And like I said, a leaky assembly, it doesn't really dry out from inundation any faster than a well-sealed one. Next slide. There is a way to measure the moisture content of building materials, and that might help you decide when you've done enough drying and it's okay to start rebuilding. What we're showing here is a pin-style moisture meter. We recommend working with a contractor to test moisture levels in your home. It's important to make sure you're sufficiently dry before moving on to repairs, or you're going to have problems down the road. So there's a link on the screen there to a training that Efficiency Vermont did last year around the same time on using moisture meters and understanding the measurements that a moisture meter will give you. And all this work that we're talking about drying out as fast as possible, it's an effort to avoid mold growing on building materials. The Vermont Department of Health doesn't recommend testing for mold before rebuilding, and that's because understanding the results of a test are difficult because there's no standards to compare those results to. No mold test is going to tell you safe or unsafe for your home. The best action to address mold is all the things that we've been talking about. Remove the moldy items, moldy materials, dry out the space, avoid things getting wet in the future by fixing leaks, or as we're going to talk about, preventing floodwaters from entering in the future. So the Department of Health guidelines that were linked earlier that have information about properly cleaning and disinfecting your home to prevent mold also have some tips in there about treating wood against future mold development. So putting a treatment on the wood. Next slide. Okay, well, most homes in Vermont are built on a basement, which is really just a hole in the ground that's always trying to fill up with water. So we've heard of several buildings where water did enter through deliberate holes in the basement, which would be the windows. And we want you to know it's okay to abandon your windows if the window is your leak length that might allow floodwaters to enter. So for basement windows, these can be covered, sealed, and insulated. On the outside, that might be using bricks. It might be patching in concrete. You could even use pressure-treated plywood, but whatever you do, it needs to be sealed. And then on the inside, you can remove the window and insulate it. For a bulkhead door, make sure that the gap around the door frame, so the rough opening of the door is sealed, that there's a sturdy latch on the door so it can't be pushed open, and that there's good weather stripping. If you have utility penetrations through the foundation wall, like for a fuel line or where the septic line goes out, any gap between the pipe, around the pipe, I should say, needs to be sealed. And you can find lots of information about materials that are suitable for sealing holes and cracks in concrete on the internet. Next slide. So when it comes time for rebuilding, you're going to have a chance to maybe make improvements. And that might be the only upside to this. Think about which materials you're using when you insulate. So some materials, we have heard reports from people who've had their homes inundated in the floods in the last year. Some materials appear not to be absorbing water and recover pretty well, and that would be closed cell spray foam, which is a spray-on foam, and also many of the board foams. So spray foam, you need to hire a contractor, but the board foams, you can do it yourself, and they should be sealed in place to be most effective. Wallboard that you might have ripped out because it was, you needed to get rid of it so that things could dry out, or maybe it was starting to develop mold. Wallboard that you're going to replace, if it's at risk of getting wet in the future, it shouldn't be paper faced. Like drywall has a paper facing, but there are wallboards that have a fiberglass face, and fiberglass faced wallboard can be left in place while it dries out. So if you're rebuilding a place that you think might get flooded in the future, don't put paper face wallboard back there. You could also consider the carbon impact of your materials. If you're anticipating future flooding, it might make sense to choose a low impact material that's compostable if you know that you're going to have to remove it in the future. And then we do need to be keeping track of local building codes and ordinances. In my hometown of Richmond, we recently got a notice from the town reminding us all that we need a permit to remove large amounts of debris and do any rebuilding. So, the towns still need to know what you're up to and to issue permits. Okay, next slide. Oh, back to you, Matthew.
Matthew, I believe you are muted.
Matt, did you say you folks can hear me? I had to unplug my headset real quick. Okay, great. I'll go through this slide quickly and then hand it over to Li-Ling again. But as we're talking about weatherization, I just want to note a couple weatherization offers that Efficiency Vermont has. And as Li-Ling was mentioned, a lot of these weatherization benefits, like reducing the energy use and improving comfort and reducing drafts in your home, are applicable for winter and summer. So if you have flood damage, adding weatherization is easy to do as you're making other repairs. You can see an offer we've kind of touched on a moment ago for low-income households. As we mentioned, there's free weatherization through the weatherization assistance programs. There's a map on your screen right now to show which agency would be the one for you, depending on where you live. And those are the phone numbers for the weatherization assistance offices at each of these agencies. Low and moderate income households can get this 75% of their costs back, up to $9,500 through Efficiency Vermont. Higher incomes are still eligible for up to $4,000 for a weatherization project. And to note, if you're a Vermont Gas customer, there are weatherization rebates you should check out from Vermont Gas as well. I'll hand it back to you, Li-Ling.
So we heard from many folks who are concerned about air quality in their homes following a flood. And so what we're showing here are the elements of a healthy home, and many of them are going to look familiar since I just talked about some of these. So a healthy home is not only clean, but it's cleanable. So think about choosing materials that are easy to keep clean. And a healthy home is also dry, which not only means drying things out, but also keeping things dry. So making sure that if you have to rebuild, that the construction is shedding water out of your building assemblies, that you're doing everything you can to keep the basement dry, that if there's any internal leaks, you've taken care of that. And exhaust fans, you need to be able to get water vapor out of the house too. So bath fans, maybe even the kitchen. A healthy home is also air sealed, and that's because it makes it possible to control the indoor environment. Keep bugs out, moisture out when you don't want moisture, maybe even keeping rodents out. If you're burning anything in the home, like wood or liquid fuels, you do need a reliable way to get the byproducts of combustion out of the house. So that is a high functioning chimney, and then making sure that that chimney can operate correctly, even if you have something like the clothes dryer running. A healthy home is also ventilated. All homes really should have a mechanical ventilation system that provides fresh air per people. Many of us don't have that, but all homes need it. And then good indoor air quality. It might be that you want to keep track of the air quality in your home. And we do sometimes get questions about whether there's a device that you can buy that will tell you if the air in your home is safe. So air quality monitors measure very specific pollutants, and sometimes they put all that together to give you an air quality score, but it's important to understand what it is that they're measuring and what that score really means. So most air quality monitors are measuring some or all of these pollutants. Volatile organic compounds, which are also called VOCs, and that would be like the new furniture smell that you get when you bring something into your home. Carbon dioxide, which just comes from people exhaling. Carbon monoxide, which is a byproduct of combustion and can be deadly. Radon, which is radioactive soil gas. Humidity, and particulates. So that's the common things that air quality monitors are measuring. Not all air quality monitors measure all those things. Mold spores are tiny particles. So I said that many air quality monitors measure particulates. And mold spores are tiny particles, and they might be measured if the air quality monitor is sensitive enough. However, mold spores are in the air all the time, and as I said, there's no standard to know whether what you're measuring is too much. We're going to put a link to a website that has reviews of air quality sensor performance, and that will help you learn more about that if you're interested in an air quality monitor for your home. And then there's one more slide for me. So the wonderful people at Louisiana State University have done a lot of work on flood recovery in the wake of Hurricane Katrina. And this is one thing that I pulled down off of their website. It shows a wall construction that they consider to be resilient to future flooding. This assembly might be more relevant for new construction, but it also can help you think about what you want to do for your rebuild if you are in a recovery situation yourself. So first thing would be to move all of your electrical stuff up out of the flood zone. So it might mean moving your electrical outlets up, further up off the floor. But the really important thing to understand about this image here is that it shows the wall studs and there's no insulation between the wall studs. All the insulation is on the outside of this wall and it's represented by the blue. Also, the wall board in this image is fiberglass faced wall board, and the wall has two deliberate openings in it that are covered by trim. The opening in the middle of the wall architecturally would look like a chair rail. And the idea is if this house would experience a flood, that you remove the trim, it opens up the wall cavity, allows air to circulate in there and to dry everything out. And of course, the wall board can stay in place. It can dry in place. And without anything in the wall cavities, things dry out faster. In Vermont, a more relevant version of this, I think, might be to use closed cell spray foam, partially filling the wall cavity. It would have the same effect, and you'd have a gap between the foam and the backside of the wall board to allow things to dry out. So, and I'll put a link in the chat if you want to know more information from Louisiana State University. And that's my last slide, so I'm going to hand it back to Matthew.
And before,
oh, go ahead, Matt. Sorry.
Before we leave this slide, there there was a question in the chat about using foam board behind this this assembly in the cavity and whether that would then be okay in future flooding. And I'd say in that scenario, we would recommend a some kind of drainage mat between the exterior sheathing and the foam board. Often this is used behind siding to create a drainage gap behind siding. Stapling that to the inside of your wall and then putting the foam board in between the studs up against it and sealing that in place. And that would allow the foam board product, if you choose the closed cell foam, should be resilient to the flood and not absorb the water. Any water that gets back there can drain through that little drainage mat. And you may not have to pull this out in a future event. Now, I say may because if it gets inundated with toxic products, fuel oil from a flood or something like that, there would need to be some cleaning, and it might be fine after the cleaning, but that would have to be assessed.
Quick follow-up question for Matt and Li Ling from Margaret, who asked that initial question. Margaret asked, are there any cost estimates of using this material? And another question from Liz, has Efficiency Vermont done any trainings on this wall building method? Either of you able to talk about cost estimates or trainings on this method?
I can say no to the latter. We haven't. Efficiency Vermont has a network of contractors, and we're providing technical training to those contractors all the time. And it may be that in the future, particularly if there's a request, that we would do a training on this. In terms of cost estimating, I can't keep up with material costs. They're erratic and rising quickly. So I don't, Matt, do you know what recent board foot costs are for spray foam?
It ranges, of course, depending on what scenario you have, between $1.50 and $2 a board foot seems to be what spray foam cost is. I think the question was about the non-paper faced board. And that I don't have an answer for. Like Li Ling, I don't have a good sense of all the material costs as they change. It is a product that is used more in commercial construction. And I just suggest you find pricing on the internet or through your local supplier.
Right. And ultimately it makes sense. Talk to a contractor, figure out how much of a material you might need for your project. And that's, maybe talking to a couple of contractors to get an estimate might give you a sense of what it might ultimately cost.
Yeah, I just want to repeat what Matt said. It's not an exotic material. It finishes just like paper face drywall. So you would just do mud finishing just like you would with drywall. So there would be a premium for the board itself, but the installation and the finishing is exactly the same.
And I would point out, though, that in this diagram, the suggestion is to actually keep a gap between the two sheets and cover it with a chair rail rather than covering it with a mud type of product, and the same at the base molding. And if you do that approach, it's really important to air seal the chair rail or the base molding to the board product you're putting up as the finish. A lot of times mud is that air seal, and you need to make that continuous. If you're not using mud, use caulk or some other product.
Great information. Thank you both. We're going to move on to kind of the mechanical systems, the machines that heat and cool your home. Matt Sharp will send this over to you to take it from here. But just a reminder to folks, if you have questions about what we're discussing here or your particular situation, please share them in the chat and we'll try and get to them as we go along.
Great. So mechanical systems, these are often found low in the house, in the basement, and thus are often damaged. And that was the case in a lot of the 2023 flooding and what we're hearing about this 2024 flood as well, of course, depending on the nature of your flooding. It's going to be tempting and may be the best solution for you to go ahead and replace what you have with something very similar, a like-for-like replacement. And you have a few opportunities to improve the situation when you're doing this. A lot of systems can be raised up off the floor. The picture you see here is a wall-hung boiler, and that can be hung up potentially above the flood line, depending on how flooded your basement might get. At least gives it a chance to stay up above 3 or 4 feet from the floor. And there are also systems, hot air systems in particular, that can be hung from the ceiling. And so if you have a hot air furnace that you need to replace, that can be hung from the floor joists that are your basement ceiling, thus getting it up off the floor and resilient at least to the 4 feet or so of water that might come in a basement. Other considerations, direct vent systems are more efficient, and you can look for the Energy Star label as well to give you a sense for energy efficiency. And there are federal tax credits for some of these fossil fuel systems, and you can check the energystar.gov website for that. And unfortunately, Efficiency Vermont does not offer any rebates for fossil fuel heating systems. But we do have rebates for heat pumps and heat pump water heaters and the like. So there are some systems we can help support with our rebate programs. One other thing I kind of breezed by, fuel storage tanks. Switching from fuel oil to fossil fuel like propane can allow you to remove the storage tank that might be in your basement, or if that storage tank was ruined, you have to get a new fuel storage tank, and propanes are typically the property of the fuel supplier, and so there's a less cost to have to deal with a infrastructure of fuel by moving that outside to a propane system. And obviously, depending on the nature of the flood, that could be affected too. So securing it as best as possible would be important. And the next slide, Matthew. So if you are considering things besides replacing what you have with a more efficient version of it, here are a few scenarios you could consider. On the water heating side, starting on the left, heat pump water heaters are by far the most efficient water heating system that you could choose. And some of the barriers to these systems is that they do need space. They're hard to put in a closet, although there are methods to deal with that, like ducting the system or using louvered doors for that closet. But they do make noise. So while they are the most efficient, and we have great rebates to support them for moderate and low income households that Matthew will get to momentarily, they are the best choice if you can make it fit. On-demand tankless systems, they they're basically, their main advantage is you can put them in small places. So if you are wanting to move your systems out of the basement and you only have a very small area to do it, an on-demand tankless system might be the best choice for you. And then there are the tank type water heaters, your traditional water heaters. Just look for the Energy Star label for those to get to optimize the efficiency. And if you can, a direct vent model has a it can fit in a tight confined space and be direct vented out safely versus a chimney vented version. If you're heating currently with hot water and you have a boiler that's heating, say, a baseboard or radiant floors, there are less options available to you to switch to a heat pump system, or at least less that are affordable and feasible. There are a technology called an air-to-water heat pump, and there's also ground source heat pumps that we don't have on these slides, but they can heat water as well. Both of those have a requirement that, or I guess a barrier, that they can only heat water up to a certain temperature. And that is around 130. It's ideal if you can get it down to 120 or 110 or even lower. So if you have radiant floors and you need to replace a system that has radiant floors, this is a type of system that can switch you away from fossil fuels and go to a heat pump for heating water to circulate through those radiant floors. It is a difficult retrofit, and difficult could mean expensive, particularly if you don't have radiant floors, because the baseboard distribution requires hot water that is hotter than these systems can provide at this point in time. Wood pellet boiler is another option. I'll keep this brief because these typically require lots of space in your basement unless you can have an outdoor storage area for pellets. But that is a system that could work for you if you have baseboard heating and you want to get off of oil and you have some kind of space. But for a lot of the hot water heated homes, one of the best choices is to do ductless heat pumps. And how many ductless heat pumps you would need to completely heat your house at all times of year would depend really on how much, how well insulated that building was. And oftentimes it makes most financial sense to only try to offset a percentage, say 80% or so of your heating with ductless heat pumps, and use something like a wood stove or maybe a pellet stove as a supplement to get you through those colder days of the year. If your system is a warm air system through ducts, there are ducted heat pumps. These are air source, or they could be ground source. Ducted heat pumps can be hung from your basement ceiling or located completely outside the basement area in say a conditioned attic or something like that. The ductwork really needs to be assessed to know and understand whether a ducted heat pump is going to work with your existing duct system. There might need to be some modifications to consider, and a qualified contractor can assess that with you. These systems can be sized to meet most, if not all, the heat in your homes, again, depending on how well weatherized that building is. And there are electric coils that can be added to these systems as an auxiliary heating for the very cold times of the year where it wouldn't make sense to run the heat pump. And since those hours of heating for those temperatures are so low, it's a fairly low impact on cost to use electric heat just for those times. Another nice thing about a ducted system is that you can add a heat recovery ventilation to these units and provide ventilation air through your duct system. And there are lots of ways to do heat recovery ventilation, but one of the advantages of having ducts is to be able to use those to inject some ventilation air and also some filtration. Central pellet furnace, it's very similar to the wood boiler scenario. Now on electrical, if your panel has been damaged or submerged, then you might be faced with having to replace that panel. It's a really good time to consider sizing that panel to accommodate any future electrification needs. if you're not ready or can't take that on now, you know, the electrification work, say a heat pump or heat pump water heater, now is the time to put a panel in that has enough breaker space for those future needs. And you could also consider upgrading to 200 amp, or at least making sure the panel is able to accept 200 amp service.
Matt, before we go to the next slide, I just want to acknowledge two questions that have come in through the chat. One from Amy asking about electrical system upgrades, and another from Liz about covering the costs of moving electrical panels out of the basement. Currently, Efficiency Vermont does not have offers available for 2024 flooding or general customers available for those electric panels. There's a component of some of our flood programs from 2023 that did offer some assistance there, but as we mentioned, those were narrowly eligible for 2023 flooding. The best way to find out if that changes is to sign up for our newsletter. We'll make any announcements about new programs that might launch through that newsletter, but Liz and Amy, unfortunately, no, we don't have any programs for that at this time. I'll move on to the next slide here for you, Matt.
Thank you, Matthew. And this is a really powerful image to show, you know, different scenarios you might be faced with or want to plan for. You know, the scenario on the left, there's maybe only a foot of water in your basement. And in that case, you could raise your systems up either on a platform or like I said before, you could hang these from the floor joists or the ceiling of the basement to get them off at least the first few feet of flooding. The components, the heat pump components anyway, have a outdoor compressor that needs to be sited as well. And those would have to get raised up off the ground, at least for snow, and certainly future flooding events could be considered with where you locate those and to protect them from any waters or erosion. Another image, this image also shows a system that's located in an attic. And this could be a good place to locate your system as well and get it above any chance to have a flood impact its ability to work. The key point here is that you really want to have your systems within the insulated envelope of your building. And so maybe this is something you think of now if you need to insulate your attic, it might be worth considering insulating along the roof line so that you have a conditioned area for a future system to go into should you be able to upgrade and move the system up into the attic. It's also a great way in terms of heat pumps to have a really small ducted system like this that serves a short run of ducts over to the maybe 3 bedrooms you have up there, instead of having to put ductless heat pump heads in every single room, which is generally not recommended in design.
Next slide.
And then on the right picture here, it just shows, you know, the other option. If you would expect flood levels to come up all the way to the basement ceiling, then, you know, up into the first floor is where you could move that air handler. But that obviously has implications to the space you have within your house to locate. And that's the slide. Other considerations. I know there's so much everyone's dealing with right now, and part of that is going to be planning to have these systems replaced. And it takes time. Contractors are very busy always, and are going to be even more busy as the heating season approaches. So it's just recommended to start planning as soon as possible. If you want to have a discussion with us about your options in your particular house, please sign up for a virtual home energy visit or give us a call. And we can help talk through some options that might fit with where you are and how you're thinking about your recovery or your resilience to future. As Li Ling mentioned, always talk to your town officials about any kind of guidance that is required or requirements. I know some towns like Barrie, Montpelier are requiring, in some locations anyway, the equipment to be moved out of the basement. And so you just want to be aware if there's any local code issues that you need to address. And even if your system wasn't damaged beyond repair, having it cleaned and tuned before the heating system and getting that on the calendar just to make sure it's operational and is clean and is ready and brings you no surprises is a really good idea. And the electric panel, we covered a little bit on the previous slides. This is another thing that can be considered to be elevated out of the basement, and finding a location on the first floor for the panel to be there. If you have to rewire first floor outlets, as part of what Li Ling presented in the flood resilient wall, moving the wiring up above the flood line and the outlets above the flood line can protect them from a future flood of having to be replaced again. And when you're upgrading your panel, consider a panel that can accommodate 200 amps and even the service upgrade if that's feasible during your project. Thanks, Matthew.
Okay, thanks, Matt. I'm gonna go through some of the heat pump offers that Matt has kind of alluded to in talking about heat pump systems that might be suitable for your home if your heating system was damaged in the flood, or if you're simply ready for a replacement. Heat pumps could be a solution. They're both a heating and a cooling system in one, and they're electric, so there's no fuel involved and no fuel tanks to worry about. Ductless heat pump systems, as Matt mentioned, sometimes called mini splits, they don't have any basement components and can be hung on walls and rooms to provide heating and cooling. And you can have multiple of those indoor units or heads to cool one room, several rooms, or several areas of the home. Ducted heat pumps, again, as Matt mentioned, can work with your existing ductwork to provide central heating, but that ductwork might need to be assessed to ensure it can work with the heat pump. And some other heat pump options there, as Matt mentioned, air to water if you currently have a hot water boiler, and some ground source heat pumps, which we won't go into too much detail in here. There are many additional rebates for heat pumps, which we'll look at in a second. But Matt, I think we've covered some of the considerations for folks who might want to consider adding a heat pump to their home. Anything to mention as we kind of talk through these offers here?
Yeah, I think it's worth noting that the heat pump rebate is per outdoor unit, regardless of how many interior heat delivery units you have. The rebate is per outdoor unit, and some utilities have higher rebates. They have bonus rebates for lower income households, and that is also per outdoor unit. In addition to that, it tends to be better designed to locate multiple outside units. So you have multiple what are called single zone or one-to-one heat pumps throughout your house, rather than one large exterior unit and several interior heat pump heads. And so that's something that we could talk more with you if you wanted to schedule a time to talk about your situation.
Thanks, Matt. Again, just the sheer variety of heat pumps means there's a variety of rebates, and they stack one on top of another. Some are instant, meaning at the point of sale. So it's important to talk to your contractor to make sure you're accessing these rebates. Other rebates are from Efficiency Vermont or a partner. Some are for bill credits from your utility or similar bonuses. And many utilities offer some kind of rebate or bonus for a customer switching to heat pumps. Again, not every utility has the same offer. This is just a sampling of the different offers from different utilities. All of this information is on the Efficiency Vermont website and will be broken down to you based on your location, your utility, if you contact Efficiency Vermont. Moving along, just in the interest of time, folks, wood heat is another component we've discussed here. Whether you want to add heat to a room through a stove or a central system, as Matt had discussed, Efficiency Vermont works with the state to provide rebates for wood heat. These are highly efficient combustion systems, usually 80% efficient or more, and that means lower emissions and less fuel used overall than older, more traditional wood stoves. You can see we have a rebate there for up to $400 on a wood or pellet stove. a central pellet furnace or boiler, up to $6,000 for those systems. Windham County residents can access, if they're income qualified, some significant offers for a advanced wood heating system. Lee-Ling, I want to ask you, are there any considerations for folks who might be thinking about adding a new wood heat combustion system to their home?
Actually, I don't really have much to add to that. And I just am looking at the time and I'm thinking we want to preserve a little bit of time to answer any other questions. So maybe we should
Perfect.
just finish up the slide deck.
Perfect. Thanks. All right, we'll move on to questions after this slide here. Another offer we've kind of alluded to here, a heat pump water heater. This is another mechanical system in your home that is usually among the second highest energy cost for a household. This new heat pump water heater offer launched April 1st. These are electric water heaters that can reduce your heating cost by about half using heat pump technology. And they offer a good balance between upfront costs and savings over time. And it just to keep in mind, you can switch to a heat pump water heater whether your home currently heats with fossil fuels, wood, or electricity, regardless of how your home currently generates hot water. So they are suitable for pretty much any current setup, but it is important to remember they do require a lot of space, and they might be better suited to a basement where there are additional benefits like dehumidification and cooling can be realized. So just keep that in mind if a heat pump water heater is something you might be considering. So I want to leave some time for questions. Oh, go ahead, Matt.
Well, I would just add in, if you don't think you have the space, you talk to your contractor or give us a call to see if there are solutions, because the rebate is so strong. If you're eligible for it, it really is something we'd like to help you find a way to do.
A question has come in here for Matt or Lee-Ling. Amy asks, any issue with trying to put heat pumps in an old house with plaster and lath walls and wood siding?
We seeing those retrofits happen regularly. Obviously if your plaster is in poor condition, it could crumble as you drill holes through it. You do need to drill a hole, and you do need to affix the indoor head to a hanging plate. So as long as you have something to nail to screw to, and that you won't be disturbing your plaster by drilling through it, I think you can do that carefully. Just make sure whoever's installing it is considering where they're drilling.
And I would also add that many homes of that era were highly compartmentalized. And so ductless heat pumps, which probably most people are thinking of when you ask that question, will really have a more limited effect in homes that are highly compartmentalized. Also, you really want a building that's had some level of weatherization in order for a ductless heat pump to be able to affect more than just the one room that it's in. So the better you can air seal and insulate a home, the more benefit you're going to get from a ductless heat pump.
Okay, I think we can, in the interest of time, there's a few more slides that are about other Efficiency Vermont resources. We don't have time to go through those slides right now, so I'll leave the remaining time and maybe a few minutes over for any questions that might come into the chat. One question that we came in through email before the webinar today about insulating a flooded basement. Matt Sharp, Lee-Ling, I'll throw this question to you. What is a more flood-proof way of insulating my basement? This customer says, I don't want to have to pull soggy fiberglass out again.
Yeah, I'll just kick it off by saying fiberglass is probably never was the right material for a basement, and we don't encourage that. Matt, do you want to walk us through some better approaches?
Sure. I mean, I think you covered them in your portion of the presentation, but the closed cell foam products are what we understand to be resilient to water. They don't absorb water, and they can be cleaned, disinfected if they were to get floodwaters on them again. Anytime you could avoid wood in sort of a wall frame scenario would be good, but if you're just insulating say a stone wall or something like that, a closed cell foam would be appropriate. And there's a lot of consideration that you could get into about making sure water vapor is controlled at the floor, and maybe you need perimeter drains or a sump pump. That stuff all gets into a lot of details that should be considered by you and your contractor.
Right. And then Matthew, I'm seeing in the chat a follow-up question to that about dealing with the floor. I think part of this question is like, how do you return a basement to a usable condition, maybe even like a finished condition? And just categorically, a hole in the ground is a really difficult place to defend if you're trying to keep it, tidy as a finished space. So I think there are many homes that are just going to have to give up on the idea of having a finished basement. It's true that there's a product that is an integrated vapor barrier and insulation and subfloor. It's called dry core, and there's probably other materials, other manufacturers that make a similar product. And those are okay for a little bit of water, but if you take a lot of water into the basement, the subfloor is going to get saturated and swell up and maybe support mold. So it's just, I think that if the basement is subject to flooding, you really need to minimize things that are in the basement. That's, my best advice is like, don't have stuff down there.
Thanks, Leland. We are kind of coming up on time, and I'm not seeing any additional questions coming in through the chat. So I will just mention, Justin in the chat just shared how valuable they found a virtual home energy visit before they took that step of connecting with a contractor. So folks, again, if you take one thing from our webinar today, I hope it's the fact that you'll consider signing up for a free virtual home energy visit through Efficiency Vermont. Our energy experts will spend about 90 minutes with you in a video chat or a phone call as you walk through your home and kind of assess what projects and priorities you should be focusing on, whether it's a flood damaged home, whether it's the middle of a project, or whether you're just thinking about what you can do to make your home more resilient to a future flood. So you can sign up for those virtual home energy visits for free on our website, or you can call Efficiency Vermont anytime to make sure you get in touch with an energy expert for those needs. I think we'll end the webinar there. Thanks everybody for your time, and we'll be sending a link with the video recording and the slides for you to review at your convenience. So thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for joining us, everyone.